Hello, everyone. Hello, hello, my people. This is Kat. You are watching Cosmic Metamorphosis. I just finished one video, so it was a little hot. Had to throw out my hair. Today we're going to talk. We're going to do Alex Collier's webinar 158 from May 27th of 2022. So I'm going to get started because it's a little long, like most of them are. So. Okay, hope all of you have been well. The sun's trying to come out here, but we got plenty of clouds. Anyway, I'm feeling a little bit better today. Hopefully everyone's feeling good. So let's get into it. He says, hello. I've been monitoring the chat boards, Knights of Terra, and a couple of others, and I hear everyone's frustration, and I am right there with you. Because we're looking at the contrast and we're only predominantly seeing one side of the contrast, and that's the dark side, he says. We're seeing all this negativity, all these things being pushed on the citizens of the world, on humanity, and we're like, where's the other side? He says it's very, very subtle, and in many areas it's virtually invisible. He says the hand, it's moving behind all of this that represents the light or right or positive. And I fully understand that life is much more than choosing sides, but I will pull that particular thought together at the end here. He says, but listen, there are some things to talk about before we can get to the topics. There are a lot of things I wanted to cover. However, there's so much real life intel, current stats that need to be addressed. He says, we're going to do this, he says. Here in the United States and also in Europe, there is a diesel shortage, and we have not been told how serious it is. Now, here in the United States, trucking companies along the East Coast and the Mid-Atlantic trucking companies have already notified their trucks that truckers are going to have to start rationing fuel. And there are trucking companies as well as fueling stations, truck stops here in the United States that have already began to notify people that they expect to run out of diesel fuel anywhere from 1 to 2 weeks. And for those of you in the States that do travel the interstates, it's called Pilot and Love's truck stops have notified their people they're having trouble getting fuel. And in 1 to 2 weeks, there may not be any diesel fuel, which of course puts a lot of pressure on everything because it's diesel trucks that deliver food, product, produce, gasoline, all of it. And they can't get a fuel in order to deliver, then nothing gets delivered. So here in the States, it's an issue. Now, understanding is that the trucking companies and the truckers union have gone to the Biden administration and said, well, can we tap the fuel reserves that we have? To which I'm told that the trucking companies were told by the Biden administration, we can't do that because we've already sent that fuel to Eastern Europe. He said, fucking Ukraine. They've sent their diesel fuel to Ukraine. Okay. And diesel fuel that was supposed to be coming to the United States is being rerouted to Eastern Europe. At least that's what we're being told. He said, so I hope you've stocked your pantries, and if you haven't, you better, because we're not producing fuel here in this country anymore. We're importing it all, which absolutely makes no sense. He says, when we have some of the largest oil reserves in Texas, basically we have the largest oil reserves in the world in Texas, parts of Colorado, Utah, and Alaska. He says it's just insanity. He says, so there are issues. There is a very high probability that diesel fuel in parts of the country will run out. And if it's rationed, then it's going to make the availability of products that much more scarce. He says, now, for those of you who are in Europe and and we're sending you diesel fuel, then you have an already existing issue. And the same will apply to you as well. Pastas, he says, rice, canned goods, things that will store well, you better get while you can. Not only that, but many of these oil producing companies don't want the Federal Reserve notes. So that's an issue, because even if we have the money to buy the oil, if those countries don't want the dollar because it's imploding, he says, that's a whole another issue. He says, so seriously, this needs to be looked at. You have to, by all means, research it yourself, because the media is as dishonest as the day is long. So just heads up on that. My kittens are escaping. I have Binks. Is this Binks? Come here, Binksy. He's been in the catnip. This is Binks. This is Zachary Binks. Oh, baby. He's full of catnip. Go on. Okay. Anyway, moving on. This tragedy in Texas and in other parts of the country, Buffalo, he says, ladies and gentlemen, there is a great deal of concern that I told you this 3.5 to 4 years ago when we first started these webinars. He says that the deep state and cabal was going to throw everything at us all at once. He says they're literally out of moves. So one of their last moves, it appears, which was on their list of things to do, creating the New World Order, he said 30 plus years ago, which I talked about 30 plus years ago, was that they had to go after the guns. They had to disarm the population. And the United States is one of those last countries, because the hunters are now being hunted. So they're freaking out. And there is chatter. They are triggering and releasing the MK Ultra robots, soldiers, etc., etc., etc. And that what happened in Texas is just a shade of things to come. Because if they can generate enough fear to not only feed them, but enough to get everyone to willingly surrender the last one of the last rights we have, which is the right to bear arms. Now, he says, I don't agree that every weapon should be out there. I think there are some weapons, he says, that really belong on a battlefield, not in a neighborhood. But if they disarm the population, then we are completely at one's mercy, at their mercy. And then they are no longer being hunted. They remain the hunters and they remain in control. But if they can push this so far and create what looks like a civil war, then the Biden administration will have absolutely no qualms to ask the United Nations to bring in troops. He said now 40% of all the UN troops are Chinese, and they would love to bring in the Chinese troops here, regardless of what you hear in the media. They want a war with China. That's rubbish, he says. The Chinese Communist Party owns Biden. He says they fucking own Biden. Make no mistake about that. They would love to bring the Chinese troops in here and let them do the dirty work. And the first place the Chinese would go is to surround the Great Lakes. He says they want the water. He says they've got to have the water, and the Great Lakes is the largest freshwater body in the world right now. And then, of course, they would go down the Midwest to control all the farmlands because they need to feed their people. He said, so this strategy has been out there for quite some time. He says they didn't expect Trump, frankly. They just didn't see it coming. He said, so that's a concern that they're releasing all these people. Now the whole thing in Texas is an absolute tragedy. And of course, what happened there, why the police stood down, why they waited 40 to 45 minutes to go in. He says why they stopped parents from going in. When the parents were outside hearing the gunfire, he says all of these things will be addressed. And you know that information will come out, and it is by now. And it won't be weeks. It's going to be days now before we realize everything that went down there and why. He says it's ugly. It's getting very, very ugly. He says the deep state and the cabal, they were for a time expecting help from off-world. That's not happening anymore, he says. The solar system is secure, both in third density and fourth density. And he says, I mean secure in the sense that it's shut down. Anything coming in here is supposed to be here. And they have all the clearances to be here. And they're here to support and to assist and to help evolve the consciousness of our solar system. He says, so I hear people say they're going to play out the second coming. He says, ladies and gentlemen, I just don't see how that's going to happen. And if it does happen, it's something the white hats want to happen. And that would be a whole different scenario. He says, we're going to move on to some other things now. He says, in M87, using the Event Horizon Telescope, they've been able to take a picture of a real black hole that we can see through Sagittarius A. The galaxy M87, they've been able to take the picture of the black hole that's at the center of M87, and it's really quite fascinating. It's something all of you should take a look at. And in fact, that the Event Horizon Telescope was able to accomplish this is quite remarkable. He says, now, something else that came out of that is that they have been using that telescope to look at the size of the universe. And NASA has realized that everything they thought about the expansion of the universe is completely wrong. And what they have seen from the data from this telescope and Hubble, they're still using Hubble as well, he says, is that everything they have measured based on neutronium physics has been wrong. So they're basically having to throw neutronium physics away, because what they are seeing is what we would now term quantum physics. And what they are able to see in the expansion of the universe is a quantum dimensional shift. What they're seeing is higher dimensional physics interacting with what we call third density. So what they are witnessing in real time is a dimensional shift of third density into fourth density. Now, when they realized that, they began to realize that the data from the Voyager spacecraft has been sending back to Earth from the edge of our solar system started to make sense. They had no idea why the data from the Voyager spacecraft, which has been out there for 45 years and still is working, has been sending back from 14.5 billion miles outside our solar system. He says, now, what's interesting is that takes 20 hours to send information with lasers to the Voyager, and for the Voyager to send it back takes approximately the same amount of time. So literally, when the information comes back and forth, it's 2 days old. Okay, he says, the information that the Voyager has been sending was making no sense, because what's happening is the Voyager sort of knows where it is, but at the same time doesn't recognize where it is, where it's at, because what it's picking up is the dimensional shift approaching our solar system from the outside. So now they're taking the Voyager information and comparing it from what they're now getting on the Event Horizon and the Hubble telescope. And what's interesting is the information is beginning to match up. So there is physical proof. We're just getting bits and pieces, but we're getting physical proof and that there is a merging of higher dimensional frequencies with what we call our third density holograph, which is really exciting information. Yay, it's coming. It says, unfortunately, it's not information they really want us to know yet because it empowers us. It empowers us to move in a different direction and to think in a different way, especially about ourselves. He says about the reality that we live in. What it does is it unwraps the Orion draconian holographic prison we've been in. It's beginning to unwrap it, and people are beginning to see, really for the first time, true possibilities of life and what it is we can create and what it is that we can become. So you know they're going to screw with that, which leads me to the next piece of information that's out there. And it's interesting that I don't hear this talked about at all. And I find it interesting that he used the word unwrapped, because he always talks about living in the moment. And I've talked about that, just living for the day in the moment, which is the present. You are the present in the present. We are unwrapping the present. Okay. He says, Microsoft has created the first DNA hard drive. And this DNA hard drive, they say they're using synthetic DNA. That's what they say. Now, 1 gram of DNA can store 433 petabytes of data, which is a staggering amount. So the capability exists, and they admit this. They're actually talking about this now. They can now transfer consciousness from someone's body, someone's brain, onto this DNA hard drive because they now have the storage capacity to do this. And that's why we have robots walking around. We have, Cylons, basically. If you watch Battlestar Galactica, they look human. Wouldn't know they weren't human. Okay. They're all programmed. Or it's like that movie with Johnny Depp. I think it was called Transcendence. I think it was Transcendence. Where his consciousness like went into a computer. So they can make a clone of yourself and then transfer that consciousness. They're calling it an avatar. They're not calling it a clone, but they're calling it an avatar. Okay. This new body. Now, when they're referring to consciousness, are they referring to it to the soul or just the consciousness, the information that's contained within your aura? I don't have that answer at the moment, he said. Now, this is, of course, gray technology. He says the Orion Grays, Zeta 2 Grays technology. He says, we know that they were able to capture the soul and can put it in a container. He says, is this the same? I don't know. But Microsoft, Bill Gates is behind this. He says, now, even though we kind of know the real one's gone, he's been dead for a while. Because now the reason they want to use DNA is because of its density and in orders of higher. He says, I'm not quite sure in how to put this, but using DNA, it's virtually limitless. And in magnitudes of what we use today, it is dramatically higher. Not only that, when they're using DNA, they can also store information in densities. Now, depending upon the DNA, and we go back to the Blue Brain project here, this is where we're connecting this. He says, see, we get these little bits of information, okay? They never tie it all together. They just put it out there and leave it floating out by itself. But if you remember what we talked about, the Blue Brain project, that inside the brains of the people, they were testing and mapping. There were multiple dimensions going on all the way up to the 11th dimension. is this the same? I haven't looked into it, but I'm pretty sure like when Obama was a president, like and I knew when I saw it, and he was talking about mapping the brain, the human brain. And I was like, oh my God, that is to like control us. Like I knew it was nefarious. So he says, well, in this DNA that they're using, this synthetic DNA, they're openly talking about, and this is from people at the University of Washington State, that they can store information and consciousness on these DNA hard drives in densities or dimensions. So they know, he said, they know. And they're using this again to control and manipulate and to own people. These people will never learn. Says so. Doug Carmean, Carmean, he spelled it out, who's a Microsoft partner architect, has a video where he talks about this. Its reliability and resiliency is why they want to go, because there's so much data being created that they have no idea how to store it. Did you ever watch Replicas with Keanu Reeves? You haven't watched Replicas. It's, yeah, he clones his whole family. It's very interesting. So he says they're going back to the original model, which is the soul. The souls contain all knowledge of all things that it's experienced. So what they're doing is trying to replicate that model. This particular program was managed at the University of Washington by Professor Louis Ceze, C-E-Z-E. They also make reference to the Deep Purple Project. He says that's something you want to look at. Now they're talking about synthetic DNA, but what's really scary here is that Microsoft is buying DNA from Twist Bioscience Dense Storage Research in IEE spectrum. Now, what is it that these companies have in common? Red Cross, blood banks from around the world, and Ancestry.com. They're using our DNA. That's why I always thought it was really cool. Oh, it'd be cool to find out where you come from, like if that's the truth. But I knew from the minute that started, I'm like, they want your DNA. I'm never doing that. Never doing any of that. Nope, nope, nope. And I've never given blood because I always knew like they're using it for something. Okay. Goodness. Bastards. Which means they're operating from the position that you no longer own your DNA. Now, he says, let's go to the next thing. University of California has created the first reprogrammable DNA computer. He says that information contained in Nature's magazine. Microsoft has also just bought a company called Nuance AI for $16 billion. They are one of the leading AI healthcare systems in the world. He says, what could possibly go wrong? What could possibly go wrong with Bill Gates running this? Now, there is an outstanding TED Talk, he says, by a gentleman, and I'm going to have to spell his name because I will butcher it. His first name is, I think he said Evgney. Last name is Cheresnev. I take it that's Yuzhny Chereshnev. Russian, obviously. It's called Owning Your Digital DNA. He talks about his experience being connected to the system, and he talks about it. How at first he was very enthusiastic about making himself part of this machine. Movie with Johnny Depp, to see its possibilities. But what he realized is that when computers first came out in 1992, there were 1 million systems, most of them government, that were connected to the web, government and corporate. He says, well, in 2020, there were 51 billion devices connected to the web. And of course, that's growing exponentially through cell phones and implants and biometrics in human beings through vaccines, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you've seen, if you haven't, people going through the graveyards and they're picking up Bluetooth signals from the graves because the bodies still have a resonant field to it. And that's the powering, and that's what's powering these chips. The Bluetooth chips that were given to people through the shot, unbeknownst to them, he says, so they're picking these up in the graves, and we know the dead are still connected to the system. Oh my God. What you realized is we're no longer users. He says, when computers first came out, we were users. Now what we are sensors for this AI system. This AI system controls and manipulates and is literally reading everything we do. And what happens now is we are sensors between life and artificial life. That's all we are. It's regarding us and everything we do and we say. Everybody needs to be aware of this, because the way the system is set up is that not only do we not own our life, because those of us that got a birth certificate, we're owned. We're collateral. But on another level, our digital DNA no longer belongs to us. It belongs to corporations and to governments, not ourselves. And we didn't know. And we didn't know. This is all information that's just now coming out for everyone to see. So that's information everybody needs to know, because they have no right, absolutely have no right, and we're not commodities. We're human beings. We are not sensors. We are souls. And I don't care personally, this is my personal opinion, I don't care if it's white hats or black hats. No one has a right to own my DNA or my soul. No one does. I have not given permission at all. So you may feel differently. That's totally okay. It is what it is. I didn't give him permission. Did you give him permission? Because I don't think any of us gave him permission. Bastards. But it's crap as far as I'm concerned, he says. And these symptoms that are out there using these systems that are out there using our DNA, we have absolutely no control over. None whatsoever. He says, now, what happens when the Cabal is taken down? What happens when the Orion AI is fully, I can't even read today. Orion AI is fully collapsed or is removed from our reality. Again, there's going to be this void, and I'll get to that in a minute. Now, of course, the COVID, everybody's getting wise to that, is essentially going away. What's left here now, and the great Cliff High has put out a little video about this, where now the information is going to come out about how and what a manipulation this was, and how it was frauded on everyone who's been taking and has literally been poisoned. And he makes the case where you want to stay away from the people who did this. And this is on all levels. They participated in this fraud. You're going to stay away from it, because more and more of this information comes out, and the more and more of these people are sick, and the realization of no matter what happens, those who got the mRNA, unless help comes, whether it's from the med beds, whether it's from the healing beds, whatever they're going to call these things, and or tech from off-world, if that information or that technology isn't released, people are going to die. It's just what it is. That was the intention of this whole thing from the get-go, was to reduce the population. It didn't go as planned, thank God. But nonetheless, there's going to be casualties. There already has been, and there already are. So now as that's coming out, they've created the monkeypox. Is my personal opinion that the monkeypox is a cover for other side effects of the, such as shingles. They look identical to each other. Now the Biden admin just bought 13 million monkeypox vaccines, which happened to be ready. It just happened to be available, right? Now, there has not been a smallpox death or an injury from smallpox in 40 years. And this new thing they want to shove down everybody's throat just in the first 3-month trials. Oh, they just want to, let me rephrase that. They just want to shove it down our throats. He says, and just in the first 3-month trials, he said 5,755 people have seriously been injured from the, my friend was one of them. If you didn't hear about that, yes, she was in a horrible car wreck, had a stroke from having this, had a stroke at the wheel. Now she has brain damage, learning to walk again, learning to talk again, if she's ever herself again. And her dog was in the car with her, so her dog died. Horribly, horribly sad. He says, so from this, they want to shove down our throats and generate fear to get people to take. He says, ladies and gentlemen, it is again my personal opinion that we just need to walk away from this entire system. Yes. This medical system has been completely compromised, with the exception of emergency medicine. I agree. It's become an absolute travesty, and their goal is clear: to reduce the population. So what we need to do is reduce the system to only emergency medicine until the holographic healing beds are released to the population. I did see a picture on Telegram the other day. I saved it. Somebody took a picture of a clinic, a place in Arizona, and there's a sign on the outside that said med beds. Oh my gosh, that the med beds were there. Although I do feel once they do become public, and I told a friend of mine, I just remember Trump saying a couple of years ago in a speech talking about the veterans, that the veterans will be first. And at the time he was talking about blind, injured veterans. And I'm just thinking the whole time, med beds, like veterans will be first to go through these beds to be healed, because they gave their life, they gave up family time, they gave up everything to be in the military and to protect us. So veterans should be first for those med beds. Anyway, and he says, now all of this is driven by the need to control. All of this is driven by the need to manipulate. All of this is driven by a need to own that which God created. Life is more than choosing sides. And he says, I get that, and we always do. At times we find ourselves in one contrast or another. But like I mentioned earlier, there's going to be a void. This void is beginning to appear, whether you see it or not, of power, as the white hats and the alliance continue to move quietly and methodically to expose the dark agenda. As this is being revealed, behind the alliance is a void, a vacuum that is being created. because they're busy pushing out the dark side, this horrible agenda, this anti-life, this anti-soul, this anti-spiritual agenda. As they're forcing it out and exposing it, there's this vacuum behind them. So what we need to do and what we should be trying to do and focusing on as people are aware of the contrast and they begin to make different choices, we need to come into the center, to the middle ground, and fill that void with what we want. This has to happen. Otherwise, that void will be filled with something we probably don't need or want. And at this point, it looks like it will probably be the military. Says, not that I have an issue with military, but I don't necessarily want the military to be in charge. He says there's a reason civilian control of military is warranted and in fact preferable. All you have to do is look at human history. He says, so as this vacuum that the white hats are creating and the alliance are creating is pursuing, we, the people, have to come in and fill that void. Now we're not choosing one side or another. He says, now we're in the middle, creating the balance or what it is we want. We seriously need to pay attention to this, he says, because as more and more history comes out, we're going to see the need for this. We already see the need for this. He says the ship, the Titanic, was sabotaged, and it was sabotaged by agents of J.P. Morgan, so that the Federal Reserve would in fact be created because there were gentlemen on that boat that wanted nothing to do with the Federal Reserve. And unless they were removed out of the equation, the Federal Reserve was never going to occur. So they killed them. They sunk the boat. It was sabotaged. So that's coming out, he says. We have had fascinating people in our history, and I'm just going to talk about one of them today because I looked at some of the questions and I really want to get to those. He says, Abraham Lincoln is an absolutely fascinating person in history, not only in American history, but world history. And I would like to remind you that one of the most interesting chapters in American history that is never talked about is the fact that Lincoln was in communication with the country of Russia, and the British Empire was planning on invading the North during the Civil War. And the only reason they didn't do that is because the Russian naval fleet positioned itself off the coast of North America. So the British would have had to go to war with the Russian Navy in order to invade the North during the Civil War. They never talked about that. And again, he says, they never talked about that. I think I heard that a long time ago, but I like that he brought this up again. It's not taught to us in US history, is it? Of course not. It says, now, an interesting thing about Lincoln's tenure in the White House, he says a lot of people think that his wife, Mary Todd Lincoln, was crazy. She had erratic behaviors, etc. And she clearly had some issues. One of those was an addiction to opium. But what's interesting about all that, Mary Lincoln would have these dreams. Lincoln himself was known to have very prophetic dreams. But Mary Lincoln was having these dreams. She was being approached in these dreams by ghosts that said they were from the Revolutionary War, ghosts that were pioneers, and others that said they were soldiers in the Union Army. And they would approach her in the dream state, and they would give her military intelligence. Ooh, just got goosebumps. Truth bumps. Regarding what the Confederate Army was doing. Now she would tell her husband about these dreams, and he dismissed them until he started getting boots on the ground intel that began to match what information Mary Lincoln was telling him that she was getting in the dreams. The intel was days, weeks, months old, and it began to match up with what she was telling him. So he started to pay attention to this because, you know, Lincoln wasn't an idiot, he said. So he started paying attention to this. And of course, when he was getting this information from his wife, he couldn't go tell his generals, well, my wife got this information from a ghost. So he would tell them this was coming from intel sources that he had developed himself so that the generals wouldn't scoff at him and think he was nuts. The only one that was only starting to pay attention to this was Grant. Ulysses Grant. This intel, Grant began to use this information, and he just he laughs. Alex laughs and he said, and there will be more on that in the future webinars. He says, I intend to not necessarily share that ghost information, but ladies and gentlemen, there is more to our holograph than we know. And there is more and more information and things that are being seen in our world that we had absolutely no information about. For example, and this next, I knew it, and he just validated it. For example, Bigfoot and their ability to move in and out of our dimension. I knew it. I knew they were interdimensional beings. Yep, that's why we can't find any proof of them. This is information we ought to know. He says ghosts, that's information we want to know. Demonic presence, that's information we absolutely need to know. How they move in and out and how they interact and attach to people. This is why my previous video I talked about, there's a video with Quantum Truth JCK, and it's with Laura Whitworth and Tony Mowry, I think his name is. And they help people get rid of their demonic attachments. So yeah, that's a really good video to watch. It's very interesting. He says, but he says, this isn't insanity. He says, we live in a multi-dimensional holograph of which all of these things exist simultaneously, and we need this information. So it will make sense to us as we begin to move forward into another dimension and what it is about and what we are seeing and what we focus on in order of what we want. So when you think of ghosts, if you've watched the ghost shows, and like some ghosts just basically get caught in time, they don't understand they're dead. They don't understand the concept of time. So when Alex talks about like other star nations and stuff, like they don't live on time like we do here in third density. So they don't have that perspective. So ghosts, souls don't have that perspective of time. You know, we'll be here hundreds of years and not know it. He says we need to clear about what's out there. We need to be clear about what's out there so we can make those decisions about what it is we want and what it is that we don't want, so that we don't get sucked into something that's dark, something that is controlling and manipulating, something that will draw our energy away from what it is we really want to focus on. We are incredible beings with incredible abilities, but we have been kept in the dark for tens of thousands of years. Yes, we have. And until our third strand of DNA lights up, we need to begin to educate ourselves about all of this information. And it's relevant, absolutely relevant, because it will not only help make sense of the present and how we've been manipulated, but it will also make sense about things. We will be learning about the past, because as we move out of the third into the fourth, we will encounter similar things. They may not be exactly the same, but we will encounter contrast. And the more information we have regarding that will assist us in making better decisions and protecting each other. Remember, in protecting each other, we will remain free. And this is a saying I kind of wrote down the other day. Like, they've divided us for thousands and thousands of years. Okay, that's what they wanted. They wanted division. They wanted it, especially over these last 2 years of not seeing each other. Oh, you can't hug each other, you can't see each other. Bullshit. You know why? Because, you know what? So it's always been you versus me. It's like, oh, it's a good thing it's you and not me, blah, 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 blah. Like, no, we need to wake up and realize that you are me and I am you. Okay, we need to wake up and realize we are all one, and we need to protect each other and we need to help each other. So no more you versus me. You are me. I am you. We are creator. So that's my part. He says, okay, this has to be something we think about. Okay, we have to protect each other, and in so doing, we will all be protected. We will have information. We will all be maybe not literally on the same page, but we will be caring and protecting each other, even if we have different goals. And for damn sure, we will be protecting future generations, which has got to happen. It has just got to happen, he says, if we want future generations to be part and exercise the law of consistency. What I know, you know. What we know, everyone else knows. Okay, no more secrets. We also need to clearly focus on creating a way of making sure that our DNA, our digital DNA, and all of those things remain our property and are private. Because at this point, the systems that are in place have all shown their preference, shown their preference to control and manipulate us with the information they have about us. He says, as these systems collapse and are removed, and those that are part of those systems are removed from power and hopefully from everything else that's involved, our reality, part of filling that void is to make sure that if we are going to be free, that if we in fact have control of our lives and our data, whatever that is, whether it's digital, spiritual, the physical DNA, all of it, he says, we ourselves own it. No one else. Own and control ourselves, that we are truly sovereign. We can't walk around and declare ourselves sovereign human beings when our DNA is owned by corporations and governments. Okay, he says, you can't do that. He says it either is or it isn't. So that's something we all, as humanity, we all need to be aware of, I guess, as humanity moves forward and demand, and whatever contracts were signed with or releases that were involved in donating blood or medical tests or surgeries, because anytime you go into a hospital and they do any kind of procedure, you sign a release. Of course you do. Well, we've given up those rights. We have got to take those back, okay? That's all I got for the moment. He says, like you, I have a lot of stuff going on as well. Okay, so that's his intel, and then it gets into questions. So first question, you have mentioned several times that when our third strand of DNA is activated, we will have full memory of past lives and remember why we are here now, to right the terrible wrong. Do you know what the catalyst will be to turn this third strand on? His question or his answer to that was no. I do not know. There are some people who've already got it turned on. Many children today coming in, especially those being targeted by the deep state, by the satanic cabals and cults. He says those kids have their third strand active. That's why they've been targeted. And you have to ask yourself, how would they know? And he validated this for me too. I've said this before, that each one of us has our own frequency. It's like our fingerprint. We have our own frequency. They know how to hone in on you exactly. And he says, frequency, because of the frequency, they can see the aura. They know the frequency, the dark side, because the Greys, the Draconians, the Orion group, reptilians, they gave compromise. They have compromised everything that is good on this planet, he says, with the exception of our hearts. Virtually everything else has been compromised by these beings. If I know that, I would have told you a long time ago what the catalyst is, but I don't know. So they know you by your frequency. Why do you think like a lot of these whistleblowers that have come out, especially in the 80s and 90s, they can hone in on their frequency. They know where they are, and they give them heart attacks. They cause them to have car wrecks, like all kinds of things. It's crazy. Question, who is putting clones and lookalikes like Joe Biden and Governor Newsom? Is it the deep state or is it the white hats, and why are they doing this? And his answer is, well, that's the $64,000 question, isn't it? I'm not sure how to answer this question. He says, I'm going to start with the dark contrasts first. He says, yes, they are doing clones. Yes, they are replacing people with actors or CGI. And the reason they are doing it is to maintain control, because they realize the jig is up. They also realize they're trying to buy time, because they're looking for a way out of their situation. On the white contrast side, they're using clones, actors, to infiltrate the dark contrast so that they can exactly map everyone that's involved in the systematic control and manipulation of humanity. So that when they finally make the move to take it all down, they are able to get all levels of this system that's been put in place and take the whole thing down like a house of cards. Bye-bye. I understand both sides, he says. At times, I don't approve or agree with what is going on, but we're not just dealing with third density here. We're also dealing with fourth density, personalities, personages. And the reason for the white hats to do some of this is to make sure they uncover and they understand the dimensional levels to the system that's been in place. He says now they're getting help from the Alliance. Don't get me wrong, the Alliance is directly involved in all of this strategy and the movement of benevolent intent, which is what they're doing. They're compressing the deep state. That's the only way I know how to explain this to you. They are literally compressing them into a small space, so that when they take it out, the whole thing is removed like a vacuum. It's just removed. It isn't just living human beings. We're also dealing with spirits, ghosts, demonic presences, and part of the process. And of course, the Alliance could do this all themselves. But what would we have learned by allowing us to experience this and see it ourselves? And I'm referring to the military, the white hats et al. They're learning the experience, what this all entails. He said, so I said earlier, when we move into the fourth, there's contrast there as well, not to this degree, but there's still contrast, and we're going to be passing through lower fourth dimension anyway, where there is this contrast, because that's some of the energies we're dealing with now. All right. It says, and I'm referring to negative contrasts. This is how you self-empower a civilization is through knowledge and experience so that we can make our own choices. Now, you may not like it, you know, and the Q team has been very specific in saying the ending is not for everyone. You know, a lot of people just want to cruise through. And he laughs. He says, that's not happening. He says, no one's cruising through. Okay. We're all earning our PhDs here. He said, every single one of us, okay, involved in this process of ascension, okay? We're getting PhDs here, and that involves in participating in this program, in this process. And I'm told we all agree to this. He says, too many people the first time cruised right through it and it didn't turn out well. So this has happened before. It wasn't successful, so it had to be redone, and this time it's going to be done. It says everyone learns something the first time, even those aware in the higher realms, and chose not to get involved, not to intervene. Well, now they're intervening. You know, this will all come out. He says this will all come out. It's just how much information can we process? That just reminds me of like in Indiana Jones, where she gets like the skull, the crystal skull, and her head, like they're transferring so much information into her brain that like she literally explodes. That's what it reminds me of. It's like there are all these people reading all this data. It's like history books. People went out and wrote books that were written by people who wrote about history, who wrote books about older history that they've experienced. He says, so when you're 2 or 3 generations removed from the actual experience of that history, your perspective is not the same. What you're doing in order to make it interesting is rewriting history based on your own perspective. He says, that's not living it. That's not experiencing it. And there are people today doing exactly that. They're not engaging, they're researching, but they're not engaging in actually experiencing what many of us are doing. That's cruising. He says, that's not going to be okay this time. Everyone has to participate, and I'm doing the best I can to explain this, and sometimes I just don't have the words. I do know that we're successful. I do know that when we come out on the other end of this, we're going to be mentoring other races, other star nations, because we will have an experience that is completely unique. He said completely unique. And it reminds me of like a stream, I guess it's past life memory, or maybe it's a future memory. I was someplace on some planet, and I remember being in a dark room, and it looked like black lights. When you have black lights on, things were kind of glowing. And I remember telling these people, oh my God, you just wait for what's coming. Like, we're going to have all these powers, and we're going to be able to do all this stuff. And it's just going to be so much like, oh my gosh. And so that just reminds me of him saying that we're going to go on to mentor other star nations. He says, we are completely unique than any other race. And I want to remind all of you, as you begin to hear these promises of avatar bodies, avatar this, clones that, I want to remind you that you are genetic royalty. You are a sovereign soul. You are a multi-dimensional being. Whether you're from 11th density or wherever, you've chosen to come into this holograph yourself and be here now. You're absolutely awesome. You are awesome. You are a spectacular, one-of-a-kind being. You don't need an avatar. You are the avatar. You are the essence of all that is. Absolutely. You will always be that. You don't need any of this other shit, he said. That's why they're going to so much trouble to copy you, to steal you, because they will never be it. Ever, he said. They will never be what you are right now. Don't sell yourself, he says. Don't do it. Tell them to go fuck themselves. That's what I say. Next question. I was wondering if your contacts, the extraterrestrials, watch your live seminars and know who attends, and can they see each one of us, who we are, our soul origins? I see this in other contactees' information occasionally. His answer was, wow, that's a great question. He says, yes, the answer is yes. You see, we create an energy field. When we're all together, we create an energy field, a field of consciousness. When you guys are on the chat and you're sharing information and the data, yeah, he says it's silicone, it's digital, but physically, energetically, we're all connecting to each other, whether it's through that technology or not. Consciously, we're all in a symbiotic relationship. So you're creating a field of consciousness. We're all connected no matter what. Even if the technology were to go down today, we would still have that connection energetically and consciously. And that connection of the third strand, when that lights up and we realize, oh my God, we were telepathic. We can be telepathic with each other. We won't need this shit. He says, we will not need any of this technology. If we use it, it's only because we're sentimental or it's habitual. But once we realize that what our true potential is, once we begin to exercise those muscles and we empower them ourselves with our own knowledge, we won't need any of this at all. It's going to be an amazing time. However, we need to be aware of what's around us, okay? We need to be aware of what's around us, the environment we live in, the multidimensional environment we live in. It says, at the moment, we're very naive or have been about what's been going on. This has to happen because this information we're gathering now through experience is what we're going to be teaching and leaving behind for future generations, so that no one gets trapped ever again in this kind of a system. And even though third density will be imploding in this part of our galaxy, there are still other areas of third density that will continue to exist. I have been told that we will be mentoring those other areas because our experience and our knowledge, and just think about that, the slaves become the mentors, become the teachers, become the professors. That's awesome. You're going to be a teacher whether you like it or not from your experiences here. Next question. I've been hearing things about the solar flare that will appear to us as a huge flash. It was mentioned that when this has occurred, our third strand of DNA may be activated. Also, will we begin to remember about ourselves that we can't remember currently, and that those who are asleep will awaken? It was suggested this will occur when we're on the brink of World War III. Can you speak about this at all? His answer to that is, I've heard all of those things as well. In fact, I've stated some of those things myself. I don't believe we're going to be on the brink of World War III. I don't either. And if even as hyped as that, it's all show. It's all a movie, literally. It's all propaganda. It's all staged to try and wake up as many people as can be awoken. I personally believe everyone that's awake now is who's going to be awake. I think there is a percentage of the population that has the IQ of a dinner plate, he says, and they're just not going to wake up. So that's on them. Those are the decisions that they're making. But yeah, that's my understanding as well. People could wake up before, or there could be a specific percentage that will wake up because of that event. We just have to see. We just have to see. If you're holding the winning hand, you never show your cards until you're absolutely ready to play them. It says, and that's what we're in. We're in this game of chess between two opposing contrasts. The good thing to remember is all the broken pieces find their way home. That's number one. And number two is when the game of chess is over, the king, the queen, and the pawn all go back in the same box. It's going to be okay, guys. He says it's going to be okay. We're just going to play it out. And it's weird. The whole fucking thing is weird. And he just laughs. And he says, it's going to get more weird, okay? He says, but we have to play this out. Otherwise, it would be over with, but we obviously have to play this out so that the experience we've gained from this and the knowledge gained, we can pass on to future generations. What we do today is really about protecting future generations of our race, of this race, which we call Terrans, humanity, this genetic royalty. That's what we're doing here, okay? Obviously, we're meant to do this. Obviously, this is important. Otherwise, the universe would have moved on, right? It would have moved on in its infinite wisdom, but clearly this is something we have to play out, and that's what we're doing. Makes sense. We're just gaining more and more experience from the longer we're here, I guess, huh? So, question, do you know what happens to the souls of the humans aligned with the regressive ETs when they are executed or die in other ways related to the Draco reptilians? Have souls? Do they have souls, and can they be redeemed? Alex laughs. He says, I have to believe all souls can be redeemed for the reason their origin point was the Great Spirit. No matter how infinitesimal that light is, he says, it still has to be there, because if that light went out, they would cease to exist. So all the broken pieces find their way home. So yes, I think all souls can be redeemed, and those who have been here and doing what they're doing are dark. I've been told they will in fact return back to source. And they will have a reset of some sort, whatever that looks like. So, you know, the Great Spirit, Creator, whatever you want to call it, it doesn't kill itself. It doesn't. He says it doesn't commit suicide. I think it gives us all enough rope to hang ourselves, and then it comes in saying, okay, it's time to grow up. You had your game. It's time to come home so that you can absorb all of your mistakes and how badly you screwed up. And then they go back to source, and you know where they get the spanking. He says they get the spanking and then pick us up and say, okay, you got your shit. Do you have your shit together now? Create something else. So this is what the Creator Spirit is saying to these souls. They basically get a spanking. You learned your lesson. Create something else now. At least that's how I can imagine it. He says, you know, like a parent would. They let you make the mistakes. Then they pick you up, dust you off, and say, okay, young man, young woman, or soul being, whatever. Now do something else. And that's the thing about creating physicality. And being in any physical realm, we have to learn what works by discovering what doesn't work. you know? He says, that's where you learn. Well, this didn't work. So then you go on to something that will positively work, and you make those mistakes. You know, this didn't work. This didn't work. Well, this worked. And sometimes we meet people who we learned from their experiences and we follow them, or learn from their experiences and we take that knowledge and then we put something together that does work. I think the biggest question to why people go into the darkness and they get caught in that spiral of control and harming others is because inside themselves, they lose the ability to love themselves. They just lose that ability to love themselves. And when they lose that ability, they lose compassion because they have no compassion for themselves. And a part of them just flips, and the whole inside of themselves is so big and so empty that they go into this place where they have to control and harm others. He says, you know, I can't go to that place because I don't understand it. And where I am now as a soul, I simply cannot fully wrap my head around it. But that's what I think. The A's have alluded to that as well, that they just lose themselves and they spiral into this place of darkness because they simply lose the ability to love themselves until they hit bottom. And then they're brought home to source, back to the Great Spirit, to where they realize who they truly are and who they've always been. I think it takes a great deal of energy and it takes a great deal of courage to be that kind of an asshole, he says, you know, to really be that kind of an asshole. And I know for myself at this point in my existence, I don't appreciate those assholes. He laughs. He says, I really don't. But it forces the rest of us to evolve and to come out of our comfort zone and to be really crystal clear about what we do want, so that we really begin to focus on what we do want. So I'm sure somewhere in there is a lesson for everyone. Oh my goodness. Okay, how many? I don't know how many more pages I have. Several. Oh my gosh, this is a long one. Sorry, guys. But next question. A star converts all of its. Now, this is if you watch the other webinars. He asked for people to go find out what happens when a star converts all of its hydrogen to helium. So someone wrote in and says, a star converts all of its hydrogen to helium through fusion, and then helium to carbon, generating energy with a reaction. The human body has 9.5% hydrogen, 8.5% carbon, and traces of helium. Although next to hydrogen, helium's the most abundant element in the universe, mostly in this, I didn't quite get the word next after that, it says Earth's place. So we as humans are star material. Is that what you meant? And he laughs and he says, yes, yes, it is. Well done. Well done. But there's a little bit more to that that's coming. Our physicality will be changing to adjust for the addition of more helium, which means more light. We're turning into light beings, crystalline beings. But you're absolutely right. He says, now, isn't it interesting? The ancients knew all this. They knew all this, he says. And then through the creation of Catholicisms, all of that information was suppressed. And now all of that ancient knowledge is all coming back because we're realizing the fallacies of Catholicisms and the true intent for creating the Catholicisms. It's been an interesting journey. At least for me, it's been a very, very interesting journey. It's worn me out, though. He laughs. He says, it's worn me out. And I know I'm not alone when I say this. I need a vacation from my life. I love that. Yes, I know that's echoing throughout the chat right now. He says, and the webinar, there's a lot of us that need a vacation from our life, just so we can detach from it for a little while to gain some perspective. He says, you know, when you're in survival all the time, it's just so grinding. And that was the intention, you know, by the dark side to do all this was to keep everyone in survival, grind us down so we would surrender our free will to those assholes. Bastards. Next question. For a movie, this current wow situation seems to have a lot of really sad scenarios with real bereaved repercussions, including deaths and permanent disabilities within my own small circle of friends and family. I can't see any connecting the dots yet. Any word from Mornay on how long this continues? Are there markers? He says, that's a wonderful question. And he ponders and he pauses and he waits, and you can see him thinking. You can see the wheels turning in his head. Should I say this? Should I not? He says, are there markers? And he laughs. I do not know how to answer that question. You know what? He says, I need to get some clarification on that. I honestly do not know what to say, and I do not know if those markers will be compromised. So obviously there are markers, that the knowledge of those markers will be compromised. What's currently in motion? We all can feel the energy building. We can all see the dark contrast being pushed on the world and being visible. It's in front of everyone to see. The last thing I would ever want to do is jeopardize the ability of the enemy to take themselves out. Do you know what I'm saying? I'm going to have to get back to you on that, and I will get back to you on that. Next question. If you had to do it all over again, what would you do differently? Thank you for your service. He says, oh shit. He says, I would have written children's books. He says, sci-fi children's books, and put all the information in it. And then it probably would have evolved into real life stories using an alias. I'm pretty sure I would not have done it the way I did it. He says, you know, when I learned about the kids, I'm like, who doesn't want to know about this? Who would not know about what's happening to the children? And I don't know if I was naive or just didn't understand the people, but you know, he says, they fucked with me. He says, they fucked with me, and I was just, oh my God. There was so many times I wanted to quit and just say, fuck it. But when I became a parent, I knew I couldn't do that. He says, I just knew I couldn't do that. So I did the best I could. And for years, I didn't even know if I was making a difference. Mostly people who know me know that I leaned on a lot of people and I vented. There are people on this webinar right now that I've talked to and bared my soul. And I just didn't know if I was doing any good or not. And there was a while there, I wasn't sure humanity was ever going to get it or even wanted to get it, you know, and then magically other people started coming forward and talking about similar things. It was interesting. In the very beginning, people within the UFO community were all about attacking each other. And I'm just like, I love that. Which is why I stopped doing the dog and pony shows. He says, going to those conferences, because you would go and the minute you leave, they'd all talk about you behind your back. And there's still a lot of that shit going on. He says, I understand there was a lot of co-opting going on. People put in to specifically attack others and to break it all down. He says, but you know, the cream always rises to the top. He says, always. And I think that's what you're seeing now at this particular time. So there's so many people who've been around and have survived the attacks and all the bullshit. You have a lot of people coming forward, a lot of young people coming forward who have a lot of experiences, and even others, old timers and whistleblowers, government people and Space Force people. People like Tony Rodriguez, I think is, you don't say Rodriguez, I think it's Rodriguez. He says, God, his story is so important. Michael Jaco, his experience is off-world. It's so important, and you'll be meeting other contactees here very, very soon. I'm talking to and trying to help them come forward, and I will do what I can to get them to do interviews with folks. And Elena's bringing people forth, and their stories are our stories. Their information is about us, and you know, we still have some shenanigans going on. But like I said, light exposes everything, and those who are telling the truth always comes to the top. The truth doesn't need any support. It can always stand on its own, always. So you can rest assured that I would do it differently. Absolutely, I would. He said I would, but it is what it is, and here we are. And he laughs and he says, we've all earned our merit badges, haven't we? We have our purple hearts. He says, ladies and gentlemen, we're out of time. Where at any time, any moment, shit's going to occur and come down. He says, batten down the hatches. Fill your pantries. I'm serious about this. Fill your pantries. Get your hands on a little bit of silver if you can. Do the things that we've talked about. Love yourself. Take care of yourself. Find time for yourself. Do the best you can. And love those who are at an opposition from a distance. We're going to get there. We're going to get through this. It isn't going to be pretty, though. He says it's not. But the deep state, the global cabal, they only have one move left, really, he says, and they're going to work it. They're going to milk it. It would be nice to see a little bit more white hats disclosure. He says, hello. So we'll see what happens. He says, until next time, love yourself, love others, take care of yourself, and take care of those around you, your loved ones, okay? Even if they don't see what's going on, at some point they will. And it's not about, I told you so, it's about welcome to the moment kind of thing. So that's it. I thought that was a great closure. So yeah, just love unconditionally. Okay. Like I said, always be that shining bright lighthouse for the lost ships on that dark sea. They will follow your light and eventually they'll get there. So I hope you enjoyed that. If you like this information, share it with others. I love all of you. I want to give all of you a great big hug. Just live in the moment. That's all we can do. And yeah, we'll get through this. And I promise, like, it's going to be fabulous on the other side. We're just going to be like, oh my gosh, like, how did we ever get through that crap? Like, I'm so happy we're here. Like, it's coming. So I have faith, and I love all of you. And I'm working on the next June 10th Alex Collier webinar. It may not get out this week, hopefully next week at some point. So I love all of you. Thank you so much, and see you next time. Bye.